I'm going to break down the part of the Deed of Settlement entitled Toitū Tūroa. The Tūroa framework is a framework that's been developed as part of these settlement negotiations. It contains an extensive iwi-led set of arrangements for managing the natural resources within the Te Whānau Apanui Rohe. The framework involves the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and the Aportiki District Council and the Gisborne District Council, as well as Central Crown agencies. So the key elements of the Tūroa framework are that there's a statement of Apanui core values at the beginning of the Toitū Tūroa section. Those values include Toitū te manatua, Toitū te Aotearoa, Toitū te mana o Ngā Hapū, Toitū te oranga whānui, o Ngā Whānau, Toitū te tiriti o Waitangi. So each of those principles of ours is unpacked and articulated in a way that reflect an Apanui commitment to our values, and then those values are then integrated into the framework so that any question of interpretation or implementation of the Tūroa framework is then done in accordance with those values. From there, there's a local authority agreement which is entered into where Apanui on the one side and then the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, the Gisborne District Council and the Aportiki District Council. The purpose of that agreement is to enable collaborative working relationships and provide a framework by which tribal laws, tikanga and our unique cultural spiritual system is taken into account and able to be related and reflected inside those relationships. As we know, with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, the Aportiki District Council and Gisborne District Council, they've all had kind of reach or footprint, at least on paper, into the Apanui territory. We're now saying to them, when you come into the Whānau Apanui territory, we want you to conduct yourselves in accordance with this local authority agreement, which sets out the protocols, relationship protocols between us. So core principles underpinning that local authority agreement are respect for the mana of our hapū, promotion of the well-being of Te Aotearoa, because our taiao's in a state, as we know, consistency with Te Whānau Apanui values for things that are going on inside our territory, and respect for Te Tiriti o Waitangi itself. So the agreement sets out the relationship sort of component whereby going forward we will have not only a voice at the table but have the right to have our values and our worldview taken into account in terms of the administration of our territory, and it's a step geared towards the recognition of the mana of our hapū. So the next part of the Toitū Tūroa framework is the Te Whānau Apanui Rohe document. That Rohe document is where we express our views on respecting the mana and tapu of the taiao, and we put those into a statement that then is reflected back to the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, so that regional policy statements need to reflect that and have that application within the Te Whānau Apanui Rohe. Those regional policy statements and therefore the regional planning documents that come off them now must be consistent with the Te Whānau Apanui Rohe statement. So that we need to write that up as an iwi and strategize that, and then once that's put in place, the regional policy statements and planning documents will need to be consistent with that document. So it's a way to ensure that our worldview is overlaid over the tribal territory, so that those people coming in to exercise any sort of authority or powers within that space are doing so in accordance with our worldview and our values. The next part of the Te Aotearoa framework are the participation arrangements, where resource consents that are applied for within the Te Whānau Apanui Rohe, they must be publicly notified, and the governance structure within Apanui can appoint qualified commissioners into the panels that make decisions on resource consents. So it's a way, again, to make sure we've got representation, we've got voice, and we've got standing inside consenting processes that would impact inside our rohe. Without those arrangements, one, there's a whole lot going through as non-notified, so we're not even coming up, they're not coming up on our radar, and we're not coming up on theirs. Now this is required that those matters must be publicly notified, and that Te Whānau Apanui will have the right to have a qualified commissioner into the consenting panel so that our views are taken into account. There's arrangements inside the deed in relation to wai Māori, so freshwater arrangements, whereby Hapū representatives form a collective to prepare freshwater management plans. Again, it's our way of setting our own parameters for the administration of the natural world. I know we don't talk about it in property sense, but the natural world and the freshwater estate within our tribal territory. So each of the Hapū are into that freshwater management group. They will then set objectives for the management plan of freshwater, objectives about flows, about limit around the big catchments that are in Apanui, particularly around our big rivers. The group, that management group, will also assess and report on any resource consent applications that are lodged, and they really play a leading role for the iwi in the freshwater management across the rohe. After this agreement, they will be guided and in fact really directed by the Hapū and the mana of the Hapū, articulating and directing to them your respective priorities around your river catchments. So it might be those Hapū that are associated and border the Motu River will have obviously strong perspectives on the way that river and that catchment is administered and managed. That will be separate and different from the way that the Hapū that border the Raukokore River might want their river and water table and water catchment administered. So the Hapū will feed that into this representative freshwater management group who will then administer that on behalf. But it is very much a mechanism that is supposed to reflect the mana of the Hapū speaking into decision making. Okay, so inside the Te Tūroa framework is also reference to Ngā Awa, and there's a Crown acknowledgement about the connection and relationship of the Hapū of Te Whānau Apanui to the rivers within our respective territory. They acknowledge that we've got kaitiaki responsibilities and they exist independently of legal ownership of the riverbeds or the lands adjoining them. Like, our responsibilities exist in our tikanga and our ture, whether or not the legal ownership of the Crown reflects that. So the arrangements in regards to the rivers reflect that we've got a distinct relationship anchored in our own tikanga, our own law, and the Crown commits within that framework to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi and to better recognise the rights and interests of the Hapū to fresh water, including the expression of our kaitiakitanga and rangatiratanga in relation to water bodies within our territory. The deed doesn't prevent Hapū from pursuing claims as the customary Aboriginal title in relation to the riverbeds or to water. Those things we can still make those claims going forward. A big chunky part of the Te Tūroa framework is the redress that has been negotiated in regards to the raukumara. So the raukumara, inland raukumara, as opposed to the raukumara at sea, the inland raukumara that goes up to the watershed and forms our border with Ngāti Porou and others. At the arrangements in regards to the raukumara, a bespoke mechanism has had to be developed because the raukumara is in such a state of crisis that, one, we can't allow it to be mismanaged the way it's been mismanaged, but also ourselves and Ngāti Porou, obviously in the full exercise of our mana and our kaitiakitanga, want to be involved and want to strategically lead the work to restore the raukumara. So because the raukumara forest is in a critical condition, it's almost reached a state of forest collapse. That's been recognised really early in the negotiations, and the immediate need to improve that situation has been in the forefront of. So the settlement establishes a new raukumara joint body, and the members are appointed by Te Whānau Apanui Ngāti Porou and the Director General of Conservation. We get 2 members each. That's so we can't get outvoted by the Crown when we're trying to make decisions in the best interest of the taiao. The functions of that group, of that raukumara joint body, are to prepare a new raukumara conservation management strategy over the raukumara in the wider East Cape. So there will now be, where the raukumara and some of Apanui lands previously have been captured under either the Bay of Plenty Conservation Management Strategy or the East Coast Hawke's Bay Conservation Management Strategy, now there will be a bespoke conservation management strategy, what we call a CMS, for the Raukumara and the wider East Cape, and that will have ourselves, Ngā Hapū and the Crown all working in collaboration to make decisions as to what goes into their conservation management strategy. That governance group will also perform functions in relation to the preparation and approval of conservation management plans over the Raukumara. So they kind of work in a government policy way, in a cascading way. So you have a CMS, a conservation management strategy, and then from that drops down into a conservation management plan. The bottom line of this redress is we've sought to have Te Whānau Apanui and Ngā Hapū equitably represented in each of those phases, and really for the principles underpinning the Raukumara and the restoration of the Raukumara to reflect our tikanga and the way that we understand our taiao, because that's about the restoration of balance and the restoration of the mauri of the Raukumara in a way that's abundant and life-supporting, as opposed to the resource management mindset that looks to see how much you can exploit a resource before it collapses, and then they set targets and limits back from the collapse point. We're saying for the Raukumara, we know it's already on the brink of collapse, but also our worldview would not manage things that way. Our worldview was less about resource management and extraction and more about balance and mauri and about respect between tuakana and Tēnā. So we're looking to have that embedded as a distinct flavour for the management of the Raukumara as its own conservation management strategy area. The next bit of the Toitū Tūroa part of the framework is in relation to the taku taimona. The taku taimona, as you know, has been on a much longer discussion with the Crown, and so there was a 2008 heads of agreement that was negotiated between Apanui and the Crown. And then, as we know, the Crown put out a drilling permit for the Raukumara Basin, and we as an iwi got stroppy about that and said, so we're not sitting at the table with you because you're being dishonourable and you're giving out mining permits in the office next door while you're negotiating with us. So we had got to the point with the Crown that we had signed a heads of agreement with them in 2008. By 2010 they were in breach of even the good faith that underpinned that. So we parked it up and said, we'll double back round for that when you're ready and when we're ready to do that. This historic treaty settlement has been a way to pull in a lot of the negotiated aspects of the 2008 taku taimona agreement between the iwi and the Crown and reliven them and get a refreshed commitment to them. But the key aspects for us again are about the reflection of the mana of the Hapū in regards to their own distinct taku taimona, so that we are not going cap in hand to the Crown or to any government official to ask them permission to exercise our own mana in our own territory. So that's number one. There are conservation processes built into that taku taimona framework where, say for conservation purposes, where people are going for concessions and consents, there needs to be reference to Hapū consent being obtained in advance of an application being pushed through those processes. So for example, in relation to concession applications, Hapū consent must be obtained before an application, say for example to possess a marine mammal or the creation of a marine mammal sanctuary or things like that. Where those formal concession processes exist in law, proposed bylaws you can use to restrict and prohibit commercial, recreational, customary fishing activity to ensure sustainability. You can put rāhui on places. You can establish and manage our pātaka more consistently with our tikanga. Te Whānau Apanui's applications for customary marine title under the Marine and Coastal Area Act not extinguished or dealt with or disposed of by this deed of settlement. We will continue to have a process whereby our claim to customary marine title will continue, and once their title is recognised, the mechanisms will sort of kick in to put strength behind that title. So just by way of reminder, Te Whānau Apanui has applied for one customary marine title that spans our entire tribal territory from Pōtikirua to Te Taumata Apanui. We've taken a one application approach since the beginning of negotiations in 2003 so that our entire tribal territory maintains its integrity. from the border at Pōtikirua with Ngāti Porou and right round to our border with Ngaitai. That's to be captured, and the plan has always been to have that captured under one customary marine title rather than have bitsy titles reflecting different parts where we assert mana. That's happened in some other rohe and some other iwi, and what happens is you create a patchwork quilt of legal protections that come on and off depending on where you're standing. We didn't want that as a legal solution for Apanui, because we've taken the perspective once you drive into Apanui borders or come in by way of the seaward boundary, that there should just be one blanket clear law relating to the customary marine title that overlays that area, and that marine title then is seen as an iwi territory marine title that has then got hapū boundaries contained within that customary marine title. But again, that's consistent with the way that we have traditionally held our taku taimona in regards to the mana of the hapū being sacrosanct. So mana in regards to the coastal marine area has never been exercised in our territory by land block or by any smaller subset of a hapū. The hapū were the autonomous governing collectives, and that's where we've tried to reflect the sanctity of that mana within the approach to the taku taimona. So that one application for the iwi is something that the iwi has endorsed since the beginning of negotiations in 2003 and continues to endorse as we go forward. It will now be reflected in the forward-looking documentation inside the Deed of Settlement.